Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, to a time when travel was measured in blisters and danger lurked just beyond the next muddy rut. We're not going to a fancy castle or a grand cathedral tonight. No, we're heading somewhere much more human, much more gritty. We're going to visit a medieval tavern. Imagine arriving after days, maybe weeks, on the road. Your clothes are stiff with dust and sweat, your feet ache, and the only thing you crave is a roof over your head and something that isn't hardtack. You smell wood smoke and something else, something less pleasant, but undeniably alive. You see a cluster of buildings ahead, and one of them, slightly larger, maybe a bit more ramshackle, seems to be the source of a low, constant rumble. This is it. Your destination. Just a heads up, you probably won't survive this trip without dysentery or getting mugged, but hey, it'll be memorable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing where you're tuning in from tonight, and what time it is there, drop it in the comments. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge the last few yards, the packed earth track turning to something resembling a well-trodden, garbage-strewn path as you approach the cluster of buildings. The air changes here. It's thicker, laden with the scent of wood smoke, not just from chimneys, but from fires burning in braziers and hearths visible through open doorways, and something vaguely like stale beer mixed with livestock and unwashed bodies. It's a potent cocktail, and honestly, after the endless scent of damp wool and horse, it's almost interesting. You can see the tavern now, even before you read the sign. It stands out, not because it's grand, but because it's the focal point of all the activity. People are milling about outside, some just arriving like you, others standing around talking, maybe waiting for someone, or perhaps just enjoying a moment of fresh-ish air before diving back inside. The noise hits you next, a wave that washes over the relative quiet of the road. It's a deep, complex sound. There's the rumble of conversation, a low murmur that rises and falls like a restless sea. Interspersed with that are louder bursts of laughter, shouts, the occasional argument, and the distinct, rhythmic thud of something heavy, maybe someone pounding a table or perhaps a less friendly impact. You can hear animals too, the whinny of a horse being tethered nearby, the bleating of a sheep being herded somewhere down the lane, the nervous cackle of chickens. And underneath it all, or perhaps weaving through it, is the faint, often discordant, sound of music. A lute, maybe, or a pipe, played with more enthusiasm than skill, adding to the chaotic symphony of the medieval street. This scene outside the tavern isn't just people arriving and leaving, it's a whole ecosystem. You see carts being unloaded, bundles of goods being hefted, horses being watered. There are vendors here too, capitalizing on the foot traffic. Someone is selling roasted chestnuts from a small brazier, adding a sweeter, smokier note to the air. Another might be hawking cheap ribbons or small trinkets. You see beggars, their hands outstretched, their voices a plaintive counterpoint to the general hubbub. Children dart through the crowds, perhaps running errands, perhaps just playing in the dirt, oblivious to the potential dangers underfoot. It's a microcosm of medieval life, compressed into the immediate vicinity of this vital establishment. Looking around, you realize just how many people are here. Medieval towns, even small ones, were surprisingly dense, especially around key points like markets, churches, and yes, taverns. It's a mainstream historical fact that taverns weren't just places to drink. They were community hubs, centers for news, gossip, and even informal business transactions. People who had traveled from different villages or even different regions would converge here, bringing stories and information with them. You might overhear snippets of conversations about the state of the harvest, the latest decrees from the Lord, or rumors of distant wars. It's like the medieval internet, but much smellier and with a higher risk of getting punched. The building itself, from the outside, is exactly what you'd expect, or maybe slightly worse. It's made of wood, likely rough-hewn timbers, probably plastered with wattle and daub, though time and weather have taken their toll. The roof is thatched, thick layers of straw or reeds, which looks cozy but you know is a prime spot for vermin and a significant fire risk. The windows, if there are any on the ground floor facing the street, are likely small, maybe covered with oiled paper or thin animal horn rather than glass, keeping the interior dim even on a sunny day. The doorway is wide, perpetually open, spilling light and noise onto the street. Above the door, there's usually a sign. It might be painted, showing a simple image like a bush, the origin of the phrase, "Good wine needs no bush." As a bush was a common tavern sign, a specific animal like a boar or a swan, or maybe just a name if the tavern keeper is feeling fancy and literate. This one has something painted on a wooden board, swinging slightly in the breeze. You can't quite make it out yet, but it adds to the character. As you stand there, taking it all in, you notice some details that a casual observer might miss. There's a dog, maybe a stray, sniffing hopefully around a discarded scrap of food near the door. A group of men are arguing heatedly near a hitching post, their gestures wide and emphatic. A woman with a large basket is trying to navigate the crowd, her face set in a determined frown. The air isn't just smoke and stale beer. You can also pick up the faint, sharp tang of animal waste from the stables or the street itself, and maybe the slightly sweeter smell of brewing if the tavern brews its own ale on site. It's a rich tapestry of odors, none of them particularly pleasant by modern standards, but all part of the authentic medieval experience. You might even spot something truly odd. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes taverns would have resident animals, not just livestock, but perhaps a trained monkey or a parrot kept for entertainment, adding an unexpected layer of strangeness to the chaos. Imagine arriving after a long journey, expecting just a drink, and being greeted by a squawking parrot telling you to mind your purse. It adds a certain je ne sais quoi, doesn't it? Or maybe just another thing to worry about stealing your nuts. Standing here, on the cusp of entering, you get a sense of the tavern's reputation just from the crowd outside. Is it mostly laborers and peasants, or do you see the finer cloth of merchants and perhaps even a minor noble's retinue? The mix of people hints at the price and quality, or lack thereof, you might find inside. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were truly class-blind spaces or if social hierarchies were rigidly maintained even among drinkers. But looking at this crowd, you see a definite spectrum, though perhaps the roughest characters gravitate towards the cheapest establishments. The sun, if it was out, is starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows. Torches are being lit around the entrance, their flickering light illuminating the faces of the people gathered there, making some look friendly, others distinctly less so. The noise from inside seems to swell as darkness approaches, promising warmth, company, and oblivion from the hardships of the road. You can feel the pull, the promise of rest and refreshment after your long, weary journey. It's time to stop observing the outside and step across the threshold. The smells, the sounds, the faces, they beckon you into the gloom. You take that final step, crossing the worn threshold, and it's like plunging into a different dimension. The outside world, with its relative light and breeze, is instantly gone, replaced by a thick, heavy blanket of sensory overload. First, the light, or lack thereof. It hits you like a physical blow. Stepping from even the dimming twilight outside into the tavern's interior is like walking into a cave after staring at the sun. Your eyes struggle to adjust, blinded momentarily by the sheer absence of light. What illumination there is comes primarily from a large, roaring hearth, its flames casting wild, dancing shadows that make everything seem alive and slightly menacing. Maybe a few sputtering rushlights or tallow candles are scattered around, offering weak puddles of yellow light, but mostly it's gloom. A deep, impenetrable, medieval gloom. You might stumble slightly, your foot catching on an uneven floorboard or perhaps a discarded bone. Welcome to the interior. Then comes the smell. Oh, the smell. The potent cocktail you sniffed outside was just an appetizer. Inside, it's the main course, the dessert, and the lingering aftertaste all rolled into one. The wood smoke from the hearth is overwhelming, stinging your eyes and catching in your throat. It's not the pleasant, crisp scent of a modern fireplace. It's thicker, heavier, laden with centuries of accumulated grime and the faint smell of whatever has been burned in it over the years, and you probably don't want to think too hard about that. Layered beneath the smoke is the dominant aroma of stale ale, spilled and dried into the floorboards over who knows how long. It's a sour, yeasty, slightly vinegary tang that seems to permeate the very structure of the building. Add to that the scent of unwashed bodies, yours included, probably, sweat, damp wool, and maybe a faint whiff of something cooking, though it's hard to tell exactly what through the olfactory fog. If there are animals kept inside or nearby, you'll catch the earthy, pungent smell of livestock. It's a powerful, complex bouquet, and while your modern nose might recoil, your medieval self registers it simply as tavern. It's the smell of warmth, shelter, and human activity, and right now, that's all that matters. You quickly learn to breathe through your mouth. Or maybe just stop breathing altogether for a few seconds, though that's not a sustainable strategy. The noise level also ratchets up dramatically. The rumble from outside becomes a roar. It's a chaotic symphony of human voices, shouting, laughing, arguing, singing, often badly, muttering, all competing for dominance. The clatter of wooden tankards on tables, the scraping of benches on the floor, the rhythmic thudding of someone pounding a fist or a mug, the occasional crash of something breaking, the braying laughter, the sharp retort of an argument escalating, it's relentless. If there was music outside, it's louder now, though still likely more enthusiastic than skilled. A lute might be twanging somewhere, or a pipe squealing, struggling to be heard over the general din. It's a constant, swirling vortex of sound that makes conversation difficult and quiet contemplation impossible. It's the sound of dozens of lives crammed into one space, all talking, drinking, and trying to forget their troubles. The air itself feels different. It's thick, heavy, and warm, especially near the hearth. The smoke hangs in the air like a low cloud, making it hard to see clearly and contributing to the general discomfort. You might feel the heat radiating from the fire, a welcome sensation after a cold journey, but perhaps oppressive if the room is packed. The floor is likely packed earth or rough-hewn wood, uneven and probably slick with spilled drinks and other, less identifiable substances. You tread carefully, trying not to slip or step on anything unpleasant. As your eyes slowly begin to adjust to the dim light, you start to make out shapes. Long, rough-hewn wooden tables and benches fill the main room, crowded together to maximize seating. People are packed shoulder to shoulder, their faces flickering in the firelight, looking like something out of a fever dream. It's difficult to discern details at first, just masses of bodies, hunched over drinks, gesturing emphatically, or simply staring into the middle distance. The walls are likely bare wood or perhaps plastered, but probably stained dark with smoke and grime. Cobwebs hang in the corners, adding to the general air of neglect. It's a mainstream historical fact that ventilation in medieval buildings, especially those with open fires like taverns, was often very poor. Chimneys were not standard in all buildings, particularly older or less affluent ones, meaning smoke often simply filled the room before finding its way out through gaps in the roof or open doors and windows. This contributed significantly to the smoky, dark atmosphere you are experiencing. Imagine trying to run a modern restaurant like this. Health inspectors would have a field day. You need a hazmat suit just to take an order. Finding an empty spot looks challenging. The place is bustling, perhaps even overflowing. People spill out from the tables, leaning against walls or standing in small groups, tankards in hand. The air vibrates with energy, some of it boisterous and friendly, some of it tense and potentially volatile. You feel the press of bodies around you, the warmth emanating from them, adding to the overall heat of the room. Here's a quirky tidbit: the constant layer of smoke inside medieval buildings, while unpleasant for the occupants, actually helped preserve the wooden structure and thatched roofs by deterring insects like woodworms and moths. So, while you're choking on the fumes, just remember, you're also getting a free side of structural pest control. Every cloud of acrid smoke has a silver lining, right? Or maybe just more soot. Looking around, you try to gauge the atmosphere. Is it mostly weary travelers seeking rest, or a rowdy local crowd? Are there women present, or is it exclusively men? The mix of patrons can tell you a lot about the tavern's clientele and reputation. Historians still argue about the extent to which medieval taverns were truly democratic spaces where different social classes mixed freely, or if certain establishments catered specifically to merchants, laborers, or even minor nobility. From your perspective, squinting through the smoke, everyone looks vaguely similar in the dim light, just figures hunched over drinks. The initial shock of entering is starting to subside, replaced by a growing sense of relief. Despite the gloom, the smells, and the noise, you are inside. You are warm, dry, and surrounded by other human beings. After the isolation and potential dangers of the road, this chaotic, smoky haven feels like a sanctuary, albeit a very rough one. You can see figures moving through the crowd, presumably serving drinks and food. Your weary body aches for a place to sit, and your throat is dry. It's time to navigate this human sea and find the person in charge. And then there are the smells. Oh, the smells. Stepping into this tavern is less like entering a building and more like being submerged in a vat of fermented, smoky, unwashed humanity. The initial assault is almost enough to make you turn tail and brave the dangers of the road again, but your weary body overrides your protesting nose. Let's break down this olfactory masterpiece, shall we? Dominating everything is the smoke. It's not just wood smoke. It's thick, acrid, and heavy, the product of a fire that's been burning for hours, probably days, maybe even years without a proper chimney. It hangs in the air like a low-lying fog, stinging your eyes and coating the back of your throat. You can almost taste it. It carries the scent of burning wood, yes, but also the accumulated grime of ages, soot, and whatever else has fallen into the hearth over time. Maybe a dropped piece of food, maybe something less appetizing. It clings to the rough-hewn timbers of the walls, the thatched roof above, and especially to the clothes of everyone inside. After an hour here, you'll smell like you've been living in a smokehouse, which, in a way, you have. Beneath the smoke, vying for supremacy, is the pervasive, undeniable stench of stale ale. It's been spilled on the floorboards, soaked into the packed earth, splashed onto the benches, and probably evaporated into the very fabric of the building countless times. It's a sour, yeasty, slightly vinegary smell, mingled with the metallic tang of dried spills. Imagine spilling a beer and not cleaning it up for a week, then multiply that by 1,000 years of accumulated spillage. It's the signature perfume of the medieval tavern, a testament to endless drinking and questionable cleaning practices. Your modern nose might wrinkle in disgust, but your medieval self recognizes it as the smell of commerce, community, and potential inebriation. It's the smell of tavern, pure and simple. And then there are the people. Dozens, maybe scores, crammed into a poorly ventilated space, many of whom haven't had access to a bath, or perhaps even running water for washing clothes, in days, weeks, or longer. The scent of unwashed bodies is potent. Sweat, damp wool, leather, and just human. It's a collective aroma that adds a thick, musky layer to the air. Remember that long, dusty journey you just finished? Everyone else here has likely been on a similar one, or perhaps just working hard in the fields or streets. It's a mainstream historical fact that personal hygiene standards were vastly different in the medieval period compared to today, with full-body bathing being less frequent for many people, especially the working classes, due to lack of easy access to heated water and private facilities. So, yeah, the body odor is definitely a prominent note in this symphony of smells. Don't expect anyone to smell like they just stepped out of a modern spa. Expect them to smell like they wrestled a sheep and then ran a marathon in their armor. Intermingled with these dominant notes are others. There's often the smell of cooking food, though it's hard to identify exactly what through the other odors. Maybe something stewing slowly over the fire, giving off a greasy, savory aroma. Or perhaps the smell of roasting meat, if the tavern is serving something more substantial. If the tavern has stables attached or nearby, you'll definitely catch the earthy, pungent smell of livestock, horses, perhaps a cow or two, maybe even pigs. It adds another layer of rural reality to the urban, or semi-urban, tavern experience. There might also be the damp, musty smell of old wood and straw, especially near the roof or in corners. And if you're unlucky, a faint, unpleasant whiff of inadequate sanitation, perhaps from a privy located too close by, or just the general grime of the street tracked inside. It's a complex, overwhelming blend, and it hits your senses with the force of a physical blow. Your eyes water from the smoke, your throat feels coated, and your nose is simply overwhelmed. You might try breathing through your mouth, but that just introduces the taste of the air, which isn't much better. You quickly realize why strong drinks were so popular. They probably helped dull the senses, including the sense of smell. A few tankards of ale, and maybe the air starts to smell less like a barn fire and more like, well, slightly less of a barn fire. It makes you appreciate modern air fresheners in a whole new way. Or even just a simple open window that doesn't let in more smoke and manure. It's a stark reminder of how much our modern lives are buffered from the raw, unfiltered sensory reality of the past. You're experiencing the world through a medieval nose, and it's quite the adjustment. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly desensitized to strong odors or if they simply had different standards of cleanliness compared to modern times. Did they just accept these smells as a normal part of life? Or did they find them as unpleasant as a modern person would? It's hard to say, but judging by the popularity of perfumes, incense, and pomanders among those who could afford them, it seems likely that they weren't entirely immune to the desire for more pleasant scents. Which brings us to a quirky tidbit. Sometimes, wealthier patrons or even tavern keepers might use sweet-smelling herbs like rushes scattered on the floor, or hang bundles of lavender or mint to try and counteract the worst of the odors. It was a bit like putting a single air freshener in a landfill, but hey, they tried. This thick, smelly atmosphere is more than just unpleasant, it's a character in itself. It tells the story of the building, the people, and the times. It's the smell of life lived hard and close, without the benefit of modern plumbing, ventilation, or deodorant. It's the smell of survival, community, and perhaps a little bit of desperation. And as you stand there, letting your senses process this unique bouquet, you realize this smell will cling to you long after you leave. It's the invisible souvenir of your visit to the Medieval Tavern. And honestly, you might need a good scrub down with lye soap and sand when you get home, if you ever get home. As your eyes slowly adjust, and your nose begins its weary surrender to the olfactory onslaught, another sense takes over the primary assault: hearing. The noise inside the tavern isn't just loud, it's a living, breathing entity, a constant, swirling vortex of sound that seems to vibrate the very air around you. The rumble you heard from outside was merely the distant surf. Now you're caught in the crashing waves. It's a cacophony, a glorious, terrible symphony of medieval humanity crammed into a single space. Dominating the mix is the sheer volume of human voices. Dozens, perhaps scores, of conversations are happening simultaneously, all at varying levels of intensity. There's the low murmur of hushed gossip in one corner, punctuated by sharp bursts of laughter. Near the hearth, a group of men are debating loudly, their voices rising in volume and passion with each tankard of ale consumed. You can pick out individual words sometimes, fragments of sentences about harvests, prices, the local lord, or the latest scandal, but mostly it's an unintelligible roar, a babble of dialects and accents from different regions. Someone is shouting across the room, trying to get the tavern keeper's attention. Someone else is complaining loudly about the quality of the ale, a common theme, you'll soon learn. It's impossible to have a quiet conversation here. You'd have to lean in close and shout directly into someone's ear, which, given the hygiene levels, might not be your preferred method of communication. Trying to order a drink feels like trying to be heard over a small riot. Interspersed with the voices are the sounds of activity. The clatter and thud of wooden tankards being set down on tables, sometimes gently, often with emphatic force. The scraping of heavy wooden benches as people shift or stand up. The occasional crash as something is dropped or knocked over, hopefully just a mug, but you wouldn't be surprised if it was a person. There's the rhythmic thudding of someone pounding a table, perhaps to emphasize a point, perhaps just in drunken frustration. And if you listen closely, you might hear the distinct clink of coins changing hands, whether in payment, gambling, or perhaps something less legitimate. Then there's the music. Ah, the music. It's rarely a polished performance. More often, it's a solitary musician, or maybe two, perched in a corner, trying valiantly to be heard over the din. You might hear the reedy sound of a pipe or recorder, the plucked strings of a lute or harp, often slightly out of tune, or perhaps the rhythmic beat of a small drum. The tunes are often simple, lively folk melodies or ballads, intended to get feet tapping or voices singing along. And sing along they do, often off-key and with great gusto. The collective singing, fueled by alcohol, adds another layer of chaotic sound to the mix, a booming, often tuneless chorus that rises and falls throughout the evening. It's the kind of music where enthusiasm definitely outweighs technical skill, but honestly, after a long day, who cares? It's lively, it's loud, and it adds to the atmosphere. You might even find yourself humming along, despite yourself. Beyond the immediate human sounds and music, there are other noises filtering in or originating within the building. If there are stables attached, you'll hear the occasional snort, stomp, or whinny of horses. Dogs might be barking, either inside the tavern or just outside. The fire in the hearth crackles and roars, adding a constant background hiss and pop. The wind might whistle through gaps in the walls or roof, a mournful counterpoint to the interior reverie. And the general shuffling and movement of dozens of people in a confined space creates its own low hum, a background noise of existence. It's a constant assault on the ears, a relentless barrage of sound that never seems to cease. There's no quiet corner, no respite from the din. It's a mainstream historical fact that medieval taverns were known for being incredibly noisy places, serving as centers of social activity where loud conversation, music, and general revelry were commonplace. Unlike modern bars that might try to cultivate a specific ambience, medieval taverns were simply places where people gathered, and their collective noise was the natural outcome. Imagine trying to meditate in the middle of a rugby scrum. That's kind of the vibe. This constant noise isn't just background, it's part of the experience. It creates a sense of energy, of life, of being in the thick of things. It can be overwhelming, especially if you're used to more sedate environments, but it also feels vibrant and alive. It's the sound of a community gathered, of stories being shared, arguments being settled, or started, and worries being temporarily drowned out by the sheer volume of human connection. Of course, it also makes it very easy to miss important information, like someone warning you about a pickpocket, or perhaps announcing that the stew has actual meat in it tonight. You might notice specific sounds related to the tavern's operations. The rhythmic pouring of ale from a large jug or barrel into tankards. The chopping of food in the kitchen area, if it's separate. The clanging of a bell if the tavern keeper uses one to signal last call or announce something, though that might be a bit fancy for this place. Even the sound of someone snoring loudly in the communal sleeping area upstairs, if it's close enough to the main room, can add to the symphony. Historians still argue whether the level of noise in medieval taverns was genuinely as deafening as some accounts suggest, or if our modern ears, accustomed to quieter public spaces, simply perceive it that way. Were medieval people more accustomed to high levels of ambient noise from busy streets, markets, and workshops? It's hard to say definitively, but judging by the descriptions, you probably wouldn't want to try and have a job interviewing here. Unless the job was professional shouter. Amidst the chaos, you might pick out a few specific sounds that stand out. Perhaps the distinctive call of a vendor who's stepped inside to sell something. The sharp crack of a game piece being slammed onto a board. Or maybe even the sound of a dog barking or a cat meowing, if the tavern has resident animals adding to the general chaos. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some taverns kept pet birds, like ravens or jackdaws, which could be taught to mimic sounds or even speak a few words, adding their own unpredictable squawks and calls to the tavern's soundscape. Imagine trying to concentrate with a bird occasionally yelling, "More ale!" or "Watch your back!" Definitely adds a certain flavor to the atmosphere. The noise is relentless, a physical presence that presses in on you from all sides. It's the sound of dozens of individual stories colliding and mingling in one space. It's the sound of escape, of camaraderie, and sometimes, of simmering tension. It's the sound of the medieval tavern, raw, unfiltered, and undeniably alive. Your ears, like your eyes and nose, are getting a crash course in the sensory reality of the past. And you haven't even ordered a drink yet. You just have to figure out how to navigate this sonic landscape and get to the counter. Good luck making yourself heard over that. As your eyes slowly, painfully adjust to the oppressive gloom, aided only by the flickering, unreliable light of the hearth and a few struggling rushlights, the amorphous masses of bodies start to resolve into individual figures. The air is still thick with smoke and the symphony of smells and sounds continues its relentless assault, but now you can see the people who are creating this chaotic atmosphere. Faces emerge from the shadows, illuminated for a moment by a dancing flame before being swallowed by darkness again. They are a diverse lot, etched with the lines of hard work, travel, and perhaps a bit too much ale. You see men mostly, though you might spot a few women scattered among them, perhaps traveling companions or even locals. Their clothing is practical, often rough wool or linen, stained with the dirt of the road or the fields. Hoods are common, pulled low over heads, offering a bit of warmth and anonymity. Hands are calloused, faces weathered. Some look weary, slumped over their tankards as if the weight of the day is too much to bear. Others are animated, gesturing wildly as they talk, their faces flushed with drink and conversation. Their eyes, when they catch the light, seem to hold 1,000 stories, some mundane, some perhaps best left untold. You can start to distinguish different types of people. There are clearly laborers, their clothes simpler, their hands rougher, perhaps speaking in a local dialect you don't quite understand. They huddle together, sharing news of the harvest or complaining about their lord. You might spot a few farmers, perhaps in town for market day, still wearing the mud of the fields. Then there are those who seem to have traveled further. You might see a merchant, perhaps identifiable by slightly finer, though still well-worn, clothes and a more guarded expression, perhaps discussing prices or trade routes with a companion. His purse might be hidden deep within his tunic, a sensible precaution in a place like this. There could be a traveling craftsman, maybe a tinker or a weaver, moving from village to village seeking work. Their tools might be visible in a pack nearby. You might even see a soldier, or someone who looks like one, their posture more rigid, perhaps nursing a drink alone or talking loudly about past campaigns. Their presence adds an edge of potential danger, as soldiers weren't always the most well-behaved patrons. The light plays tricks on your eyes. Shadows deepen features, making some faces look more menacing than they might be in daylight. A friendly smile can appear as a grimace, a weary slump as a suspicious crouch. You find yourself instinctively scanning faces, trying to read intentions, a skill honed by necessity on the medieval road. Who looks trustworthy? Who looks like they've had one too many and might cause trouble? Who looks like they're watching you? It's a subtle dance of observation and caution. The seating arrangements offer some clues, though they aren't definitive. Groups of people who arrive together tend to stick together. Those who seem to know each other locally might occupy a favored corner. Travelers like yourself are probably looking for any available space, willing to share a bench with strangers out of sheer exhaustion. Despite the crowded nature of the room, people tend to respect a certain amount of personal space, though personal space in a medieval tavern is probably measured in inches, not feet. You're likely rubbing shoulders with the people on either side of you. It's a mainstream historical fact that medieval taverns served as vital social centers for people from various walks of life, offering a rare space where different social classes might potentially interact, albeit often within certain unwritten rules. While not a melting pot in the modern sense, they were certainly places where news and gossip traveled freely between different segments of society. A peasant might overhear a merchant discussing market prices, or a soldier might share rumors of political unrest with a local farmer. You might notice the little interactions happening around you. A group of men playing dice, their voices rising and falling with the fortunes of the game. Two people locked in what looks like a serious negotiation, perhaps a business deal being struck over drinks. Someone slumped asleep at a table, their head resting on their arms, oblivious to the surrounding noise. A lone figure sitting quietly, staring into the fire, lost in thought or despair. Children might be present, perhaps helping their parents who work here, or just trying to stay out of the way. The firelight catches on details: the glint of a cheap ring, the worn leather of a belt, the rough texture of homespun cloth. You see the way people hold their tankards, some cradling them possessively, others slamming them down empty, demanding refills. You notice the expressions: weary relief, boisterous mirth, simmering anger, quiet contemplation. It's a tableau of medieval life, raw and unfiltered. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were truly democratic spaces where social hierarchies were significantly blurred, or if people primarily stuck to their own kind, with interactions across class lines being more functional, like buying drinks, than genuinely social, while the potential for mixing was higher than in many other medieval spaces. It's likely that ingrained social norms and expectations still influenced who talked to whom and how they behaved. You might spot something that seems out of place or unexpected. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes, traveling entertainers like jugglers, acrobats, or even bear handlers would perform in taverns for tips, adding an element of unpredictable spectacle to the evening. Imagine trying to enjoy your watery ale only to have a man juggling flaming torches suddenly appear near your table, or a small, sad-looking bear being led through the crowded room. It certainly would liven up the evening, provided the bear wasn't too grumpy or the juggler too clumsy. You might want to keep your hands inside the table area just in case. As you continue to observe the faces in the firelight, you get a sense of the energy of the place. It's a mix of desperation and conviviality, weariness and revelry. People are here to escape the cold, the dark, the dangers of the road, and the hardships of their daily lives. They are seeking warmth, company, drink, and maybe a brief moment of forgetfulness. You are just one face among many in this smoky, noisy, crowded room, united by the common need for shelter and sustenance. It's time to stop observing and become a participant. You need to find the person who can get you a drink. That means navigating this sea of bodies and sounds and smells, and somehow making your presence known. Navigating the dense thicket of bodies, smells, and sounds feels like traversing a swamp in the dark. You elbow gently, or not so gently, depending on your level of exhaustion and desperation, past groups huddled around tables, sidestep a potential argument brewing near the hearth, and try to avoid making eye contact with anyone who looks too interesting. Your goal is the source of the drinks, the heart of this chaotic organism, the counter, or perhaps just a designated serving area. It's not always obvious in these older, less structured buildings. You follow the flow of people with empty tankards, or perhaps just the general direction of the loudest shouting for more ale. Finally, you spot them. Behind a rough-hewn wooden counter, or perhaps just a sturdy table that serves the purpose, stands the tavern keeper. They are the linchpin of this entire operation, the one person who holds the reins, however loosely, of this rowdy establishment. Your first impression is likely one of sheer, unadulterated busyness. They are constantly in motion, pouring drinks, collecting coins, dishing out food, shouting instructions to unseen helpers, and simultaneously trying to keep an eye on the entire room. The tavern keeper themselves is probably a figure of some resilience. Running a place like this requires a thick skin, a strong arm, for pouring, or perhaps for breaking up fights, and an even stronger constitution, to tolerate the noise, the smells, and the clientele. They might be burly and imposing, their face a mask of weary patience or outright exasperation. Or perhaps they are wiry and quick, darting between patrons with surprising agility. Their clothes are likely practical and sturdy, probably stained with countless spills, and they might wear a leather apron. Their hands are probably large and capable, used to hefting heavy jugs and counting coins worn smooth by generations of handling. Their expression is hard to read in the dim, flickering light. Is that a welcoming smile or a forced grimace? You can't be sure. Getting their attention is an art form in itself. You can try shouting, but everyone else is doing that. You can try waving your hand, but they're probably already juggling 3 tankards and a platter of stew. Your best bet is probably to wait for a fleeting moment when their eyes sweep across your section of the room and then offer a hopeful nod, or maybe just push your way to the front of the makeshift queue, if one even exists. It's a test of patience and assertiveness. Finally, their gaze lands on you, brief and assessing. "What'll it be?" they bark, their voice rough from shouting over the din all night. There's no time for pleasantries, no welcoming speech about the specials. This is a transaction, plain and simple. You stammer out your request, a tankard of ale, perhaps, and maybe something to eat, and if they offer it, a place to sleep. They nod curtly, or perhaps just grunt, already turning to grab a tankard from a stack. You fumble for coins in your purse or pouch, hoping you have enough of the right denomination. Medieval currency could be confusing, with different coins from different regions and fluctuating values. Paying for a drink might involve handing over a few small silver pennies or even copper tokens, if they accept them. The tavern keeper takes the coins, gives them a quick glance, and shoves them into a leather pouch tied to their belt or throws them into a wooden box. There's no receipt, no change given unless absolutely necessary, and certainly no customer loyalty program. The role of the tavern keeper went far beyond simply serving drinks. They were the host, the manager, the bouncer, and often, the primary source of news and information for travelers. It's a mainstream historical fact that medieval tavern keepers were often pillars of their local community, sometimes even serving as minor officials or being responsible for reporting suspicious persons to the authorities. They had to know everyone who frequented their establishment, keep track of tabs, often using notches on a stick or chalk marks, and enforce a semblance of order in a place where tempers could flare quickly, especially after a few drinks. Imagine being the person responsible for telling a group of rowdy, armed mercenaries to keep it down. Not exactly a job for the faint of heart. They also had to manage the supplies, ensuring there was enough ale brewed or delivered, enough food prepared, and enough space for everyone. They dealt with suppliers, collectors, and potentially tax officials. Their livelihood depended on their ability to keep the ale flowing and the patrons relatively happy and, crucially, paying. They were constantly busy, their minds juggling a dozen different tasks at once. You might notice the way other patrons interact with them. Some are familiar, exchanging a brief word or joke. Others are respectful, knowing the keeper holds the power to serve or deny. And some are clearly trying to take advantage, perhaps arguing about a price or trying to sneak off without paying. The tavern keeper handles it all with a practiced ease, their face rarely betraying their true feelings. They've seen it all: drunken brawls, desperate pleas, whispered secrets, shady deals. This tavern is their domain, and while chaos reigns, they are the eye of the storm. Historians still argue whether the social standing of medieval tavern keepers was generally respected or if they were often viewed with suspicion due to the nature of their business, which could attract less desirable elements of society. Were they seen as legitimate business people providing a vital service, or as facilitators of vice and disorder? It likely varied greatly depending on the individual keeper, the reputation of the tavern, and the local community's attitudes. The keeper turns back to you, holding a roughly made wooden tankard. It's heavy and feels solid in your hand. The outside might be carved or just plain wood, and the inside is likely lined with pitch or wax to make it waterproof. It's far less refined than the glass or ceramic mugs you're used to, but it looks sturdy enough to survive a bar fight. As they hand it over, they might offer a brief piece of advice or warning, or perhaps just a weary look that says, "Don't cause trouble." You take the tankard, the wood feeling rough against your skin. The air around the counter is particularly thick with the smell of stale ale, closer to the source. You can hear the coins clinking in the keeper's pouch and the constant scrape and thud of activity behind the counter. It's a tiny island of semi-order in the sea of chaos that is the main room. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval towns, tavern keepers were legally required to live on the premises and keep their doors open late into the night, sometimes even all night, to provide shelter for travelers arriving after dark. Imagine being on call 24/7 in a noisy, smoky, potentially dangerous building filled with strangers. That's dedication. Or maybe just a job description. Sounds like a recipe for needing your own tavern just down the street when your shift ends. As you step away from the counter, tankard in hand, you feel a small sense of accomplishment. You've successfully navigated the first hurdle, obtained your first objective. You have a drink. Now you just need to find somewhere to sit down, somewhere that isn't already occupied by someone who looks like they want to steal your socks, or perhaps is currently asleep face down in a puddle of something you don't want to identify. The tavern keeper is already turning to the next waiting patron, their face resetting to that familiar mask of weary efficiency. Your brief interaction is over, just one of hundreds they will have tonight. But for you, it's the beginning of your medieval tavern experience. And now that you have that tankard, It's time to see what's actually in it. You take the roughly made wooden tankard from the tavern keeper, the wood feeling solid and surprisingly heavy in your hand. The outside is plain, perhaps a bit worn smooth from countless other hands holding it, the inside lined with some dark, slightly sticky substance, likely pitch or wax to prevent leaks and protect the wood from the liquid. You can feel the coolness of the liquid through the wood, a welcome sensation after the oppressive warmth and thick air of the tavern. You lift it, bringing it closer to your face to inspect your first medieval drink. It's ale, of course. What else would it be? In medieval England, and much of Europe, ale was the ubiquitous drink. Water sources were often unreliable and potentially contaminated, making drinking water risky. Milk was generally consumed fresh or processed into cheese and butter. Wine was expensive, often imported, and largely the preserve of the wealthy and the clergy. Cider was popular in apple-growing regions, but ale was the everyday beverage for most people, across all social classes. It's a mainstream historical fact that ale was a fundamental part of the medieval diet, consumed by men, women, and even children, from breakfast onwards, because the brewing process, which involved boiling the water, made it safer to drink than untreated water. Think of it less like a recreational alcoholic beverage and more like, well, liquid bread with a slight buzz. A necessary hydration source that also provided calories. Your medieval self probably views this tankard not just as a thirst quencher, but as essential sustenance. You look into the tankard. The liquid isn't clear and sparkling like modern beer. It's likely cloudy, maybe even opaque, a murky brown or reddish-brown color. There might be sediment floating in it, or perhaps settled at the bottom. It doesn't have a thick, frothy head like a modern pint, maybe just a thin layer of bubbles that quickly dissipates. It looks rustic, unrefined. Honestly, it looks a bit like muddy river water that someone tried to boil. Which, given the state of medieval rivers, might not be far from the truth, except for the boiling part. You cautiously bring the tankard closer to your nose. The smell is strong, yeasty, and earthy. It's the smell of fermentation, of grain, and perhaps a faint hint of bitterness, although medieval ale was often brewed without hops, which became popular later for preservation and flavor. Without hops, the ale would spoil relatively quickly, meaning taverns brewed small batches frequently, or the ale was consumed very soon after brewing. This also meant the taste and quality could vary wildly from one batch to the next, even within the same tavern. One day it might be passable, the next, well, let's just say you might want to drink it quickly and hope for the best. You take a sip. The taste is interesting. It's definitely not like a modern lager or even a modern ale. It's thicker, less carbonated, and the flavor is intensely malty, yeasty, and perhaps a bit sweet, depending on how the brewing went. If it lacks hops, it might have a slightly sour or bready tang. The alcohol content was generally much lower than modern beer, often estimated at around 2 to 3% ABV, especially in the small ale, which was brewed from the second or third runnings of the mash and consumed in large quantities throughout the day. Stronger alesh existed, saved for special occasions or those who could afford them, but the everyday drink was low alcohol, calorie-rich, and designed for hydration and sustenance rather than inebriation, though that certainly happened too. You could probably drink several tankards of this stuff before feeling much effect, which is probably a good thing, considering how much people relied on it. Imagine trying to work in the fields after downing a few modern IPAs at breakfast. You'd be asleep face down in the furrows by noon. The texture is also different. It feels thicker, almost chewy sometimes, due to the unfiltered nature and potential sediment. It coats your mouth. It's a substantiale drink, a meal in a cup almost. Your modern palate might find it strange, maybe even unpleasant, but your medieval self finds it comforting and energizing. It's warm, it's filling, and it's a break from the endless thirst of the road. You gulp down a larger swallow. It goes down easier the second time. Historians still argue whether the taste and quality of medieval ale would be truly unpalatable to modern tastes, or if our palates have simply become accustomed to different brewing methods and ingredients. Some experimental brews based on historical recipes have produced surprisingly drinkable results, while others, well, Let's just say they're an acquired taste. Was it genuinely unpleasant sometimes, or just different? It's hard to know for sure without a time machine and a very brave liver. Beyond standard ale, some taverns might offer other options, though they were less common or more expensive. Mead, a fermented drink made from honey, was popular in some regions, especially earlier in the medieval period. It was often sweeter and stronger than ale, and therefore more costly. Cider, made from fermented apples, was common in apple-growing areas like parts of England and France. Wine, as mentioned, was expensive and mostly imported, a luxury for the elite. Water was generally avoided unless it was from a known, clean source, which was rare in populated areas. So, for most people, in most taverns ale was king. And queen. And court jester, probably. You might notice other patrons drinking from similar tankards, or perhaps clay mugs, or even horns in some places. The amount they drink is prodigious by modern standards. People would consume gallons of ale over the course of a day. It was their primary source of liquid, calories, and maybe even a bit of social lubrication. They weren't sipping daintily. They were drinking with purpose. Here's a quirky tidbit. Because medieval ale often lacked hops for preservation, brewers sometimes added other flavorings to make it more palatable or to help it last slightly longer. These could include herbs, spices, or even fruit. Common additions included gruit, a mix of herbs like mugwort, yarrow, and heather, ginger, cinnamon, or even things like honey or berries. So your ale might taste not just of grain and yeast, but also have unexpected herbal or spicy notes. It was a bit like a medieval craft beer scene, but instead of debating hop profiles, they were arguing about the merits of mugwort versus ground ivy. And probably fighting about it too. You finish your first tankard surprisingly quickly. Despite the unfamiliar taste and appearance, it was cold, or at least not warm, and wet, and your body was desperate for liquid. You set the tankard down on the rough table with a clatter, the sound lost in the general din. You feel a little bit better, a little less parched, a little more present. The low alcohol content means you're not feeling a buzz yet, just relief. But the calories are starting to register, a faint warmth spreading through your belly. You look around at the other patrons, many of them nursing their own tankards, some already on their second or third. The sheer volume of liquid being consumed in this room is staggering. It makes you wonder how often people had to, use the facilities. Which, in a medieval tavern, might be a topic you'd rather not dwell on too much. Let's just say it probably involved a trip outside, and hope the weather is good and you don't step in anything unfortunate. You realize that while the ale has quenched your immediate thirst, your stomach is still empty. The smell of food, faint but persistent beneath the dominant odors of smoke and stale ale, is starting to become more appealing. You need something solid to go with this liquid sustenance. Something to soak up the ale, something warm and hearty after the journey. You look towards the counter again, or perhaps scan the room for someone carrying trays of food. Your journey into the medieval tavern experience is far from over. You've had your first taste of the ubiquitous drink. Now it's time to see what's on the menu for dinner. You set the tankard down, the rough wood clattering against the equally rough table. The ale, while hydrating and providing a few calories, hasn't done much to satisfy the gnawing hunger in your stomach. The long journey has taken its toll, and your body is craving something substantial, something warm and filling. The faint smell of cooking food, which was barely noticeable amidst the dominant odors of smoke and stale ale earlier, now seems to assert itself, drawing your attention. You scan the room, trying to see where the food is being served, or if someone is circulating with trays. Food in a medieval tavern wasn't like ordering from a modern menu with dozens of options. It was typically simple, hearty, and whatever the tavern keeper had prepared that day. The focus was on providing sustenance to travelers and locals, not on gourmet dining. You might see large pots simmering over the hearth, their contents giving off a greasy, savory aroma that, despite the general funk of the place, manages to smell surprisingly appealing to your hungry stomach. Or perhaps there's a spit near the fire, slowly turning a piece of meat, its fat dripping into the flames with a hiss and a puff of smoke. You make your way back towards the counter, or maybe towards a separate area where food seems to be dispensed. The air here is a little warmer, a little thicker with the smell of cooked things. You see rough wooden platters or bowls stacked nearby, waiting to be filled. The food itself, when you get close enough to see it, is presented without fuss or fanfare. It's functional food, designed to fill you up. The most common offering would likely be some form of stew or pottage. This would be a thick, slow-cooked mix of whatever ingredients were available: grains like oats or barley, vegetables like onions, cabbage, leeks, or root vegetables if they were in season and accessible, and perhaps small pieces of meat or bone for flavor, if you were lucky and the tavern wasn't too cheap. It would be served in a simple bowl, perhaps made of wood or earthenware, and eaten with a spoon or just a piece of trench bread. The smell is earthy, savory, and comforting, the kind of smell that promises warmth and satiety. It's probably not seasoned with exotic spices, salt, maybe a few common herbs like parsley or sage, but it's hot and it's food. It looks like thick, brownish slop, but your stomach doesn't care about aesthetics right now. Another common item would be bread. Not the fluffy, sliced bread you're used to, but dense, heavy loaves made from coarse grain, perhaps barley or rye, or a mix. This bread, often called manchet, for finer loaves or just general household bread, was a staple. It was often used as a trencher, a thick slice that served as a plate, with the food piled on top. After the meal, the trencher, soaked with juices, might be eaten by the diner or given to a beggar or the dogs. It's practical, edible tableware. Think of it as a medieval, less crispy bread bowl. And probably less sanitary. Meat might be available, but perhaps not in large quantities or every day. If they are serving meat, it might be roasted on a spit, or perhaps cut into pieces and added to the stew. Common meats included pork, beef, mutton, or poultry like chicken or goose. Wild game might also appear if the tavern keeper had hunting rights or acquired it somehow. The smell of roasting meat, if it's on offer, is a powerful draw, a richer, fattier aroma compared to the vegetable stew. Seeing a piece of actual meat on a platter feels like a small luxury after weeks on the road subsisting on dried rations. Other possibilities include cheese, perhaps hard and aged, or fresh curds. Eggs, if available, might be boiled or added to the stew. Fish might be served, especially on fast days when meat was forbidden, though getting fresh fish far from the coast or a river was a challenge. Vegetables, as mentioned, would be added to stews or perhaps served simply boiled, though fresh salads weren't really a thing. Everything was cooked. Boiling killed germs, remember? Eating raw vegetables was a risky business. You managed to get the tavern keeper's attention again, or perhaps one of their assistants, often a wife, child, or servant. You point to the simmering pot or the meat on the spit and indicate you want some. The price is negotiated, maybe a few more pennies, depending on what you choose. Meat would be more expensive than stew or bread. You hand over the coins, and they dish out a portion onto a wooden platter or into a bowl. It's served hot, steaming in the cool, smoky air. You find a space, perhaps squeezing onto a crowded bench at a table, or finding an empty corner if you're lucky. You sit down, the platter of food in front of you. The smell is stronger now, immediate and real. You pick up your spoon, if you were given one, or perhaps just break off a piece of bread. You take a bite of the stew. It's hot, perhaps a bit bland by modern standards, but incredibly satisfying. The texture is thick, the grains giving it substance, the vegetables soft from long cooking. If there's meat, you chew it slowly, savoring the rare taste. The bread is dense and chewy, perfect for soaking up the juices. It's not fancy, it's not refined, but it's exactly what your body needed. It's a mainstream historical fact that medieval tavern food was generally simple and aimed at providing basic nourishment and calories for travelers and laborers. It was designed to be filling and relatively cheap to produce, using common ingredients that could be kept and cooked in bulk. Don't expect a diverse menu or complex culinary techniques. Think more along the lines of a medieval truck stop diner, functional, hearty, and maybe a little greasy. Eating in the tavern is a communal experience, whether you intended it or not. You're packed in with others, their elbows brushing yours. You might overhear conversations happening around you as you eat. People aren't quiet while they eat. There's slurping, chewing, talking with mouths full. Medieval manners were probably a bit different from what Emily Post would recommend. You might see someone sharing food with a companion, or perhaps trading a piece of bread for a sip of ale. You finish your food relatively quickly. It wasn't gourmet, but it was warm, filling, and stopped the hunger pangs. You scrape the last bit from the bowl or trencher with your spoon or finger. You feel a sense of satisfaction, a physical comfort that only comes from being well fed after a period of deprivation. You might chase the last bite down with a gulp of ale, the flavors mingling in your mouth. Historians still argue whether the nutritional value of medieval tavern food was adequate for the demanding physical labor performed by many of its patrons. While providing calories, was it balanced? Did people suffer from nutritional deficiencies despite consuming large quantities of ale and pottage? It's hard to say definitively, as diets varied greatly by region, season, and individual circumstances, but it's likely that access to fresh produce and varied protein sources was limited for many, especially during winter or long journeys. You might notice something unexpected about the food. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes, tavern keepers would add ingredients to the stew or pottage that might seem strange to us today, like rendered animal fat, tallow or lard, for extra calories and richness, or even things like dried peas or beans that had been stored for a long time. The goal was sustenance, and waste not, want not was the motto. So that extra greasy layer on your stew might not just be fat from the meat, it could be added tallow. Yum! Or maybe just calories. Necessary calories. As you sit there, a little warmer, a little fuller, you look around the room again. The faces in the firelight seem a little less menacing now that your immediate needs are met. The noise is still deafening, the smell still potent, but you feel a sense of temporary security. You have food and drink, shelter from the elements. You are part of this bustling, chaotic microcosm of medieval life. But what do people do in a tavern besides eat and drink? This isn't just a restaurant, it's a social center. What happens when the immediate need for sustenance is met? You can hear sounds of activity that aren't just talking and eating. There's laughter, shouts of excitement or frustration, the distinct clatter of something being played. It seems the medieval tavern offers more than just basic necessities. It offers ways to pass the long hours, to forget the hardships of the day, to find entertainment. With your belly full of pottage and a tankard of ale warming your hands, or perhaps already emptied and waiting for a refill, you start to notice that not everyone is simply focused on eating and drinking. Around the room, amidst the general roar of conversation, you can pick out distinct pockets of activity, centers of diversion and entertainment that offer a brief respite from the harsh realities of medieval life. The tavern isn't just a place for sustenance, it's a place to pass the time, to forget your troubles, to gamble a few hard-earned pennies, or simply to listen to a story. One of the most popular forms of entertainment, and potentially the most dangerous, is gambling. You can see groups huddled around tables, the air thick with tension and excitement. The most common game is dice. Rough, uneven dice, perhaps made of bone or wood, are being thrown onto the table with fervent cries. Voices rise and fall with the turn of the bones, shouts of triumph, groans of despair, muttered curses under the breath. Money, or sometimes goods, change hands rapidly. It's a quick way to make a fortune, or, much more likely, to lose everything you have. The stakes might be small, a few pennies, a round of drinks, or they could be significant, involving larger sums or even personal possessions. The atmosphere around these games is electric, a mix of hope, greed, and desperation. You might be tempted to join in, to try your luck, but you also sense the potential for trouble. Arguments are common, sometimes escalating quickly into pushes, shoves, or worse, especially when ale has loosened tongues and thin tempers. Playing dice in a medieval tavern is not for the faint of heart, or for anyone who isn't prepared to walk away significantly poorer, or perhaps with a bruised eye. It's like a medieval casino, but instead of slot machines, you have questionable dice, and instead of free drinks, you have watery ale, and the security is, let's just say, less professional. Beyond dice, other games might be played. Early forms of card games were becoming popular in some regions, though dice remained king. Board games like tables, a precursor to backgammon, or even a rough game of chess might be found, particularly among slightly wealthier or more educated patrons, offering a slower, more strategic form of diversion compared to the frenetic pace of dice. But the fundamental draw is the same: competition, risk, and the hope of winning. These games aren't just about passing the time, they're about testing fate, proving skill, or luck, and the thrill of the wager. Then there's the music. You can hear it weaving through the din, sometimes barely audible, sometimes rising above the clamor. There's likely a musician, or perhaps a pair, perched in a corner, doing their best to entertain the crowd. Their instruments are simple: a lute, its strings perhaps a bit slack and out of tune, a pipe or recorder producing reedy, sometimes squeaky melodies, maybe a small drum providing a basic rhythm. The music is often lively, intended for dancing or singing along. The tunes are folk melodies, simple ballads, or popular songs of the day. The skill level varies wildly. Some musicians might be genuinely talented, earning their living by traveling from town to town, tavern to tavern. Others might be little more than enthusiastic amateurs, playing more for their own enjoyment, and perhaps a free drink, than for the quality of the performance. The sound is raw, acoustic, and often drowned out by the surrounding noise. It's not the polished, amplified music of a modern venue. It's organic, often discordant, and deeply human. And the patrons often join in. Fueled by ale, inhibitions lower, and voices are raised in song. Group singing is common, a boisterous, often off-key chorus that adds another layer to the tavern's soundscape. People might sing along to the musicians' tunes, or they might launch into their own drinking songs, bawdy ballads, or laments. It's less about hitting the right notes and more about the shared experience, the camaraderie of raising your voice with others in a moment of collective revelry. It's kind of like a medieval karaoke night, but everyone is already drunk, and the sound system is just yelling. Beyond formal games and music, conversation itself is a major form of entertainment and diversion. Remember those faces in the firelight? Everyone has a story to tell, news to share, gossip to spread, or an opinion to loudly express. Travelers bring news from distant places, rumors of wars, reports on harvests, news from the royal court, descriptions of other towns and regions. Locals share gossip about their neighbors, complain about taxes, discuss the weather, always a popular topic, or tell tales of local events. The tavern is a vital hub for information exchange, a place where oral culture thrives. Stories are told and retold, embellished with each telling, blurring the lines between fact and fiction. Someone might be recounting a daring adventure on the road, another spinning a tall tale about a mythical creature, while a third is sharing the latest scandalous rumor about the local priest. Listening in on these conversations, even if you can only catch snippets through the noise, is a fascinating glimpse into the concerns, beliefs, and imaginations of medieval people. It's the medieval equivalent of scrolling through Twitter, except the tweets are shouted at you by someone who smells strongly of stale beer. It's a mainstream historical fact that medieval taverns were often centers of gambling, despite official attempts to regulate or ban it at various times. Authorities worried about the potential for disorder, debt, and crime associated with heavy gambling, but it remained a popular pastime for people of all social classes who frequented taverns. Historians still argue whether the storytelling and news sharing in medieval taverns served primarily as entertainment, or if they were genuinely important mechanisms for disseminating information and shaping public opinion in a society with low literacy rates and limited access to written news. Were these just drunken ramblings, or a crucial part of the medieval communication network? It's likely a bit of both, depending on the speaker and the audience. You might even see other, less common forms of entertainment. Here's a quirky tidbit. While less frequent than music or games, some larger or wealthier taverns occasionally hosted traveling performers such as jugglers, acrobats, or even puppeteers who would put on shows for tips. Imagine the surprise of seeing a man juggle flaming torches in the middle of that smoky, crowded room. It certainly would break up the monotony of just drinking and arguing. You just hope they had good aim. The overall effect of these diversions is a constant hum of activity and energy. The noise, the movement, the focus on games and performance, it all contributes to the vibrant, sometimes overwhelming atmosphere. People are here to escape their daily grind, to find companionship, to test their luck, to laugh, to sing, and to forget. The entertainment might be simple, raw, and occasionally dangerous, but it's undeniably alive. It reflects the spirit of the people who gather here, seeking moments of levity and connection in a challenging world. You feel the energy of it, the collective desire for distraction and enjoyment. It makes the tavern feel less like just a shelter and more like a destination. A place where things happen. And as the night wears on, and the ale continues to flow, these activities only intensify, the laughter growing louder, the arguments more heated, the songs more boisterous. The tavern is truly coming alive around you. With your belly full of pottage and a tankard of ale warming your hands, or perhaps already emptied and waiting for a refill, you start to notice that not everyone is simply focused on eating and drinking. Around the room, amidst the general roar of conversation, you can pick out distinct pockets of activity, centers of diversion and entertainment that offer a brief respite from the harsh realities of medieval life. The tavern isn't just a place for sustenance. It's a place to pass the time, to forget your troubles, to gamble a few hard-earned pennies, or simply to listen to a story. One of the most popular forms of entertainment, and potentially the most dangerous, is gambling. You can see groups huddled around tables, the air thick with tension and excitement. The most common game is dice. Rough, uneven dice, perhaps made of bone or wood, are being thrown onto the table with fervent cries. Voices rise and fall with the turn of the bones, shouts of triumph, groans of despair, muttered curses under the breath. Money, or sometimes goods, change hands rapidly. It's a quick way to make a fortune, or, much more likely, to lose everything you have. The stakes might be small, a few pennies, a round of drinks, or they could be significant, involving larger sums or even personal possessions. The atmosphere around these games is electric, a mix of hope, greed, and desperation. You might be tempted to join in, to try your luck, but you also sense the potential for trouble. Arguments are common, sometimes escalating quickly into pushes, shoves, or worse, especially when ale has loosened tongues and thin tempers. Playing dice in a medieval tavern is not for the faint of heart, or for anyone who isn't prepared to walk away significantly poorer, or perhaps with a bruised eye. It's like a medieval casino, but instead of slot machines, you have questionable dice, and instead of free drinks, you have watery ale, and the security is, let's just say, less professional. Beyond dice, other games might be played. Early forms of card games were becoming popular in some regions, though dice remained king. Board games like tables, a precursor to backgammon, or even a rough game of chess might be found, particularly among slightly wealthier or more educated patrons, offering a slower, more strategic form of diversion compared to the frenetic pace of dice. But the fundamental draw is the same: competition, risk, and the hope of winning. These games aren't just about passing the time, they're about testing fate, proving skill, or luck, and the thrill of the wager. It's a mainstream historical fact that medieval taverns were often centers of gambling, despite official attempts to regulate or ban it at various times. Authorities worried about the potential for disorder, debt, and crime associated with heavy gambling, but it remained a popular pastime for people of all social classes who frequented taverns. Then there's the music. You can hear it weaving through the din, sometimes barely audible, sometimes rising above the clamor. There's likely a musician, or perhaps a pair, perched in a corner, doing their best to entertain the crowd. Their instruments are simple: a lute, its strings perhaps a bit slack and out of tune, a pipe or recorder producing reedy, sometimes squeaky melodies, maybe a small drum providing a basic rhythm. The music is often lively, intended for dancing or singing along. The tunes are folk melodies, simple ballads, or popular songs of the day. The skill level varies wildly. Some musicians might be genuinely talented, earning their living by traveling from town to town, tavern to tavern. Others might be little more than enthusiastic amateurs, playing more for their own enjoyment, and perhaps a free drink, than for the quality of the performance. The sound is raw, acoustic, and often drowned out by the surrounding noise. It's not the polished, amplified music of a modern venue. It's organic, often discordant, and deeply human. And the patrons often join in. Fueled by ale, inhibitions lower, and voices are raised in song. Group singing is common, a boisterous, often off-key chorus that adds another layer to the tavern's soundscape. People might sing along to the musicians' tunes, or they might launch into their own drinking songs, bawdy ballads, or laments. It's less about hitting the right notes and more about the shared experience, the camaraderie of raising your voice with others in a moment of collective revelry. It's kind of like a medieval karaoke night, but everyone is already drunk, and the sound system is just yelling. You might even find yourself humming along despite the dubious pitch, caught up in the energy of it all. Beyond formal games and music, conversation itself is a major form of entertainment and diversion. Remember those faces in the firelight? Everyone has a story to tell, news to share, gossip to spread, or an opinion to loudly express. Travelers bring news from distant places, rumors of wars, reports on harvests, news from the royal court, descriptions of other towns and regions. Locals share gossip about their neighbors, complain about taxes, discuss the weather, always a popular topic, or tell tales of local events. The tavern is a vital hub for information exchange, a place where oral culture thrives. Stories are told and retold, embellished with each telling, blurring the lines between fact and fiction. Someone might be recounting a daring adventure on the road, another spinning a tall tale about a mythical creature, while a third is sharing the latest scandalous rumor about the local priest. Listening in on these conversations, even if you can only catch snippets through the noise, is a fascinating glimpse into the concerns, beliefs, and imaginations of medieval people. It's the medieval equivalent of scrolling through Twitter, except the tweets are shouted at you by someone who smells strongly of stale beer. Historians still argue whether the storytelling and news sharing in medieval taverns served primarily as entertainment, or if they were genuinely important mechanisms for disseminating information and shaping public opinion in a society with low literacy rates and limited access to written news. Were these just drunken ramblings, or a crucial part of the medieval communication network? It's likely a bit of both, depending on the speaker and the audience. You lean back on the hard bench, trying to decipher the shouted words filtering through the noise. Is that a real story about a dragon sighting, or just someone who had too much ale and a vivid imagination? In this place, it's hard to tell. You might even see other, less common forms of entertainment. Here's a quirky tidbit. While less frequent than music or games, some larger or wealthier taverns occasionally hosted traveling performers such as jugglers, acrobats, or even puppeteers who would put on shows for tips. Imagine the surprise of seeing a man juggle flaming torches in the middle of that smoky, crowded room. It certainly would break up the monotony of just drinking and arguing. You just hope they had good aim, or that you weren't sitting too close. A flaming torch landing in a thatched roof would turn this lively scene into a very different kind of excitement, and not the fun kind. The overall effect of these diversions is a constant hum of activity and energy. The noise, the movement, the focus on games and performance, it all contributes to the vibrant, sometimes overwhelming atmosphere. People are here to escape their daily grind, to find companionship, to test their luck, to laugh, to sing, and to forget. The entertainment might be simple, raw, and occasionally dangerous, but it's undeniably alive. It reflects the spirit of the people who gather here, seeking moments of levity and connection in a challenging world. You feel the energy of it, the collective desire for distraction and enjoyment. It makes the tavern feel less like just a shelter and more like a destination. A place where things happen. And as the night wears on, and the ale continues to flow, these activities only intensify, the laughter growing louder, the arguments more heated, the songs more boisterous. The tavern is truly coming alive around you. You've eaten, you've drunk, you've observed the chaotic dance of entertainment. Now, as the hour grows late, the thought of finding somewhere to rest your weary head starts to become paramount. But where exactly do you sleep in a place like this? As the ale settles in your belly and the initial novelty of the tavern's chaos begins to wear off, the sheer exhaustion from your journey starts to reassert itself. The raucous laughter, the pounding music, the endless chatter, it all starts to blur into a persistent, wearying hum. Your body aches, your eyes feel heavy from the smoke and the dim light, and the hard bench is no longer a comfortable place to rest. The thought of a soft place to lie down, a brief escape from the sensory onslaught, becomes incredibly appealing. You need to find somewhere to sleep. You manage to catch the eye of the tavern keeper again, or perhaps one of the assistants. You ask about a bed, a place to rest for the night. They nod, wiping their hands on a stained apron. It's common for medieval taverns to offer lodging, particularly to travelers. It might be part of the price of the drinks and food, or a separate charge depending on the establishment. They point towards a staircase, often narrow and creaky, leading upwards into even deeper gloom. Up there, they might grunt, or perhaps offer a slightly more detailed instruction. Find a space. Pay in the morning. There's no booking system, no private rooms waiting with your name on the door. It's first come, first served, and you take what you can get. You ascend the stairs, the noise from the main room fading slightly but still a powerful presence beneath your feet. The air up here is different, perhaps less smoky than right by the hearth, but likely colder, damper, and still thick with the lingering smells of the tavern below, mingled now with a new aroma. The smell of bodies packed together in a confined space, the faint scent of straw, and maybe something less pleasant that you try not to identify. As your eyes adjust to the even darker conditions, you step into the communal sleeping chamber. It's not a room filled with individual beds like a modern hotel. Instead, you see rows of simple pallets or mattresses laid out on the floor, crammed together to maximize the number of people who can fit. These beds are often little more than sacks filled with straw or reeds, perhaps covered with a rough woolen blanket or two if you're lucky. They are lined up side by side, sometimes separated by nothing more than a few inches of space. There's no privacy here, no walls or curtains dividing one sleeping space from the next. You are simply one body among many, sharing a large, dark room with complete strangers. It's a mainstream historical fact that communal sleeping arrangements were common in medieval inns and taverns, particularly for travelers who couldn't afford lodging at a monastery or a wealthy private home. Privacy was a luxury most people simply didn't have or expect when on the road. You scan the room, looking for an empty spot. Most of the pallets are already occupied, figures huddled under blankets or simply lying prone, some already asleep, or pretending to be, others still restless, shifting or muttering. You find a vacant space near the wall, perhaps, or squeezed between two other sleeping figures. You approach it cautiously, assessing the quality of the straw mattress. Is it relatively fresh, or does it look lumpy, compressed, and perhaps inhabited by small, unwelcome creatures? You probably don't want to think too hard about that last part. You gingerly lie down on the straw-filled sack. It's hard and rustles loudly as you shift your weight. The smell of dry straw fills your nostrils, mixed with the pervasive odor of the room. Trying to get comfortable is a challenge. The mattress is thin and offers little padding against the hard floor. The straw is lumpy and shifts beneath you. It might be itchy, sending small tickles across your skin. The blanket, if you have one, is coarse wool, warm but scratchy. And then there are the sounds. Despite being upstairs, the noise from the tavern below is still clearly audible, a muffled but persistent roar that makes it hard to clear your mind and drift off. You can hear the distant shouts, the occasional burst of drunken laughter, the faint thrumming of music. And closer by, within the sleeping chamber itself, there's a symphony of nocturnal noises. Snoring, loud and varied, from different corners of the room. Coughing, sighing, muttering in sleep. The rustling of straw as someone else shifts. The occasional creak of the floorboards as someone gets up, perhaps to use the facilities, a thought that sends a shiver down your spine. Where exactly are the facilities, and is it worth the trip in the dark? It's a chorus of human and structural sounds that makes finding peace incredibly difficult. You are acutely aware of the other people around you. You can feel their warmth radiating from the adjacent pallets. You can hear their breathing, sometimes heavy and ragged. You are literally sleeping elbow to elbow with strangers whose backgrounds, intentions, and personal hygiene are completely unknown to you. It's an exercise in vulnerability and trust, or perhaps just a necessary evil of medieval travel. You clutch your purse or valuables tightly, perhaps tucking them deep inside your tunic or tying them to your body. Theft was a real risk in places like this. You try to position yourself facing the wall, or away from your neighbors, seeking a small illusion of privacy. But you know you are exposed. The temperature might change throughout the night. The warmth from the hearth downstairs might rise, making the room stuffy, or the cold night air might seep in through gaps in the walls or roof, leaving you shivering under your thin blanket. Insects are likely present. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, these were common companions in medieval life, and communal sleeping areas were prime breeding grounds. You might find yourself itching, swatting at unseen tormentors, adding to your discomfort. It's not exactly a 5-star hotel experience, is it? More like a medieval-themed escape room where the goal is just to get a few hours of uninterrupted, non-itchy sleep. Good luck with that. Historians still argue whether the level of comfort and cleanliness in medieval tavern sleeping quarters varied significantly depending on the establishment's reputation and price. Was it always this rough, or were there places that offered slightly better conditions, perhaps with cleaner straw or more blankets, catering to wealthier travelers? It's likely there was a spectrum, but even the better places probably wouldn't meet modern standards of hygiene or privacy. Despite the discomfort and the noise, sheer exhaustion eventually starts to take its toll. Your body is weary, your mind is tired of processing the constant sensory input. You try to focus on the feeling of being horizontal, of having a roof over your head, however leaky or vermin-infested it might be. You pull the rough blanket tighter around you. You close your eyes, trying to block out the flickering shadows cast by any remaining light from downstairs or through gaps in the walls. You might find yourself drifting in and out of sleep, acutely aware of the sounds and movements around you. A sudden snore might jolt you awake. The creak of floorboards might make you tense up, wondering who is moving around in the dark. The persistent itching of straw or something less pleasant might interrupt your rest. It's not deep, restful sleep. It's more like a state of semi-consciousness, your senses still on high alert even as your body tries to shut down. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval inns, rather than individual pallets, there might be 1 or 2 very large beds designed to accommodate multiple people, essentially sleeping in a pile with strangers. This was sometimes called a truckle bed, or simply a shared bed. Imagine booking a hotel room and being told you'll be sharing a king-sized bed with 5 other random travelers. Talk about an awkward morning. You'd probably draw straws to see who gets the edge and who gets stuck in the middle. You try to find a position that minimizes contact with the lumpy straw and your neighbors. You tuck your hands inside the blanket, protecting them from potential pests or pickpockets. You breathe shallowly, trying to avoid inhaling too much of the stale, dusty air. It's a far cry from your comfortable bed back home, or wherever you came from in your modern life. It's a harsh, raw, communal experience, a reminder of the realities of medieval travel and the lack of private, comfortable lodging for most people. But even amidst the discomfort, there's a strange sense of shared humanity. You are all here, travelers and perhaps locals, huddled together in the dark, seeking shelter and rest. Everyone is vulnerable, everyone is tired, everyone is just trying to make it through the night. You are part of a temporary, makeshift community, bound together by the shared experience of sleeping in a medieval tavern. As the night wears on, the noise from downstairs might eventually subside, replaced by the deeper, more consistent sounds of sleep, the collective breathing, the occasional snore or sigh. The fire in the hearth might die down, plunging the room into near-total darkness, broken only by faint moonlight through cracks or a distant street torch. The air grows colder. You pull the blanket tighter. You try to ignore the itching, the lumps, the sounds, the smells, the presence of the strangers beside you. You focus on the simple fact that you are inside, you are relatively safe, at least from the dangers outside, and you are resting. It's not good rest, but it's better than sleeping by the side of the road. You drift, reluctantly, into a fitful, shallow sleep, dreaming perhaps of softer beds and cleaner air. You hope you wake up with all your possessions, and without too many new companions of the six-legged variety. As you lie there, or perhaps just sit nursing your ale as the night wears on, the initial relief of finding shelter begins to mingle with a growing awareness of the inherent risks of a place like this. The medieval tavern, for all its warmth and company, is not a sanitized, perfectly safe haven. It's a melting pot of people from all walks of life, some honest, some desperate, and the combination of close quarters, dim light, and flowing alcohol creates an environment where danger is always lurking just beneath the surface of the revelry. You might have felt it subconsciously since you first stepped inside, that low hum of potential volatility underneath the noise and laughter. Now, as you settle in, or try to, those possibilities start to feel more real. One of the most obvious dangers is physical violence. Arguments, often fueled by ale, can escalate rapidly in this crowded, tense atmosphere. A disagreement over a game of dice, a perceived insult, a dispute over a bill, or simply drunken belligerence can quickly turn into a shouting match, then pushes and shoves, and sometimes, a full-blown brawl. You might hear the sudden crash of a table overturning, the splintering sound of wood, loud shouts of anger or pain, and the general panic as people try to get out of the way. Seeing a fight break out in a medieval tavern is probably less like a choreographed movie scene and more like a chaotic, clumsy, potentially brutal mess involving fists, chairs, and maybe even knives if things get serious. Getting caught in the middle of a brawl, even as an innocent bystander, is a real risk. You could be shoved, trampled, or accidentally hit. Your medieval self knows to keep an eye on groups that seem particularly agitated and to position yourself near an exit if possible, just in case. It's the kind of place where you learn to finish your drink quickly if things start getting heated in your immediate vicinity. Or maybe just hide under the table. Though given the floor, perhaps hiding isn't the best plan. Theft is another significant concern. With so many people crammed together, many of them travelers carrying whatever valuables they possess, taverns are prime hunting grounds for pickpockets and cut purses. In the dim light and chaotic noise, it's easy for someone to bump into you, accidentally, while expertly relieving you of your purse or anything else loose on your person. The communal sleeping arrangements upstairs, as you may have just experienced, are particularly vulnerable. Sleeping strangers are easy targets. You clutch your money pouch a little tighter, maybe patting your pockets instinctively. You look around, trying to identify anyone who seems to be watching others more than participating in the general merriment. Some faces look shifty, their eyes darting around the room, not meeting anyone's gaze directly. These are the people your instincts scream at you to be wary of. Keeping your valuables secure, perhaps tied inside your clothing, is essential. Trusting strangers in a place like this is a fast track to being left penniless. Beyond immediate physical threats, there are less visible but equally insidious dangers, disease and ill health. The hygiene standards, as you've probably gathered from the smells and general state of the place, are not what you'd call pristine. The air is thick with smoke and the exhalations of dozens of people. Surfaces are likely rarely cleaned, coated in layers of grime and spilled liquids. Food preparation might happen in conditions that would make a modern health inspector faint on the spot. Water, if used for anything other than brewing, could be contaminated. It's a mainstream historical fact that diseases spread easily in crowded medieval environments with poor sanitation, and taverns, as hubs of transient populations, were often vectors for the transmission of illnesses. Something as simple as a shared tankard, passed from hand to hand, could potentially spread anything from a common cold to something much worse. The risk of contracting dysentery or other stomach ailments from questionable food or drink is high. Your modern self cringes at the thought, but your medieval self probably just accepts it as a potential consequence of travel and communal life. You cross your fingers and hope your immune system is having a good day. Even the ale itself, while safer than water, carried risks. If poorly brewed or spoiled, it could make you sick. And of course, excessive consumption of alcohol leads to its own set of dangers: impaired judgment, increased likelihood of getting into fights, becoming a target for thieves, or simply injuring yourself stumbling around in the dark. Getting completely drunk in a medieval tavern is essentially painting a target on your back. It's like saying, "Please feel free to take my money and maybe punch me." Not exactly a winning strategy for survival. There's also the risk of being drawn into something more serious than a bar fight or petty theft. Taverns were places where deals were struck, information was exchanged, and sometimes, less than legal activities were planned or carried out. You might overhear snippets of conversations that sound suspicious, or witness interactions that suggest something illicit is happening. Depending on the tavern's reputation and clientele, you could stumble into a meeting of criminals, find yourself sitting next to someone wanted by the authorities, or inadvertently become involved in a plot you know nothing about. Staying alert and observing your surroundings without drawing too much attention to yourself is a fine balance. You want to be aware of potential threats, but you don't want to look like you're spying, which could also get you into trouble. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were genuinely hotbeds of serious crime and vice, or if their reputation was exaggerated by moralizing authorities and chroniclers. While petty crime and drunken disorder were undoubtedly common, were they truly centers for organized criminal activity or political plotting on a large scale? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, varying greatly depending on the specific tavern, its location, and the era. You might notice the tavern keeper or their staff trying to maintain some semblance of order, but their capacity to do so is limited. They might try to break up minor scuffles or eject patrons who are causing too much trouble, but they are outnumbered and likely more concerned with keeping the ale flowing than acting as law enforcement. Calling for the town watch, if there even is one readily available, might take time and doesn't guarantee their intervention or effectiveness. You are largely on your own here, relying on your wits and instincts to navigate the potential dangers. It's a place where being street smart, or rather, tavern smart, is crucial for survival. And then there are the smaller, less dramatic but still unpleasant risks. Losing your way in the dark, tripping over something on the uneven floor, stepping in something you'd rather not think about, encountering pests like rats or mice scurrying in the shadows. Even the simple act of sitting on a rough bench or leaning against a grimy wall can leave you itchy and dirty. It's a constant low-level assault on your comfort and well-being. It's enough to make you miss the relative predictability of the open road, where at least you knew the dangers were mostly wolves and bandits, not questionable stew and potential stab wounds over a game of dice. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval towns, tavern keepers were held legally responsible for the debts and even the crimes committed by their patrons while on the premises, which gave them a strong incentive, though not always effective means, to try and control the behavior within their establishment. Imagine having to pay for the damage caused by a drunken brawl and potentially facing a fine or even jail time because someone stole a purse under your roof. It was a tough gig. Made you think twice about serving that last tankard, maybe? So, as you sit or lie in the medieval tavern, surrounded by the noise, the smells, and the flickering firelight, you are keenly aware that this isn't just a place of rest and revelry. It's a place where fortunes can be lost, tempers can flare, and health can be jeopardized. You keep one eye on the crowd, your hand loosely near your few possessions, and try to get what rest or refreshment you can, knowing that the most unpredictable dangers might be the ones you haven't even thought of yet. It's a raw, unfiltered slice of medieval life, and the potential for things to go wrong is as much a part of the atmosphere as the smoke and the ale. You just hope you make it through the night unscathed, ready to face the journey that awaits you outside these walls. You've spent hours immersed in the sensory hurricane of the medieval tavern, the thick smoke, the overwhelming smells, the relentless noise, the flickering faces, the rough ale, the simple food, the chaotic entertainment, and the ever-present undercurrent of danger and discomfort, even in the attempt to sleep. Maybe you managed a few fitful hours of rest upstairs, or maybe you just decided to brave it out downstairs, nursing your drink and keeping one eye open. Either way, the intense atmosphere has perhaps started to feel claustrophobic, and you crave a different kind of medieval experience, a glimpse of the world just beyond these smoky walls. You decide to step outside, even if just for a moment, to see what else the immediate vicinity of the tavern and the edge of this medieval town has to offer. Stepping back out through the wide, worn doorway is like emerging from a cave. If it's daytime, the natural light, even if cloudy, feels blindingly bright after the tavern's gloom. If it's still twilight or night, the air feels cooler, fresher, and the stars or moon might be visible, a welcome sight after being confined indoors. The intense smells of the tavern, the stale ale, the heavy smoke, the unwashed bodies, don't disappear entirely. They cling to your clothes and hair, a lingering souvenir of your visit. But they are immediately joined, and perhaps overpowered, by the other smells of the medieval street. The sharp tang of animal waste from passing livestock or stables nearby. The earthy smell of damp earth or mud. Maybe the slightly sweeter scent of wood smoke from other, better ventilated chimneys. If there are workshops nearby, you might catch the metallic smell of a blacksmith's forge, the dusty smell of a carpenter's shop, or the acrid scent of a tanner's yard, though hopefully that last one is a little further away. Tanneries were seriously smelly. The air feels thinner, lighter, and you take a deep breath, grateful for the relative freshness, even if it's still far from pristine by modern standards. The noise level changes too. The concentrated roar of the tavern dissipates, replaced by the broader, more varied soundscape of the medieval town edge. You still hear human voices, but they are more spread out, less overwhelming. You hear the creak and rumble of carts on the uneven ground, the clip-clop of horses' hooves, the bleating of sheep being driven somewhere, the squawking of chickens. If there's a market nearby, you'll hear the shouts of vendors hawking their wares, the haggling of buyers, the general hubbub of commerce. You might hear the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer on anvil, the sawing of wood, the distant sound of a church bell marking the hour or calling people to prayer. It's a different kind of symphony than the tavern's chaotic din, less intense, more varied, reflecting the different activities of daily life. It's the sound of the town working, living, and moving. Looking around, you see the other buildings near the tavern. They are typically simple structures of wood, wattle and daub, or perhaps stone if you're in a wealthier area. Their roofs are thatched or tiled. Doors and windows are often open, offering glimpses into workshops or homes, revealing people going about their tasks by firelight or daylight. The street itself is not paved, but a packed earth track, likely uneven, dusty in dry weather, and a muddy, treacherous mess when it rains. There might be a drainage ditch running down the middle or side, carrying away, well, you probably don't want to know what it's carrying away. You tread carefully, watching where you step. If you're lucky, the tavern is located near the town market, a central feature of medieval urban life. Markets were held regularly, often once or twice a week, attracting people from the surrounding countryside as well as local residents. Stepping into a medieval market square, even if it's just winding down in the evening or setting up in the morning, is a fascinating experience. Stalls are set up, often simple wooden tables or cloths laid on the ground. Vendors display their goods, fresh produce, seasonal and local, of course, grains, cheese, eggs, perhaps live animals like chickens or rabbits, cloth, leather goods, tools, pottery, and all sorts of other necessities and small luxuries. The air here smells of produce, animals, perhaps baking bread from a nearby baker, and the general dust and activity. It's a vibrant, bustling place, the economic heart of the community. It's a mainstream historical fact that medieval markets were crucial for the local economy, serving as the primary place for the exchange of goods and services between townspeople and the surrounding rural population. They were also social events, places to meet neighbors, hear news, and maybe catch a traveling performer or two. Beyond the market, you might see the workshops of local craftsmen. A blacksmith, his forge glowing red hot, hammering out tools or horseshoes, the sound ringing through the air. A carpenter, shaping wood with hand tools. A weaver, working at a loom, the rhythmic click-clack audible from the street. A baker, pulling fresh loaves from a wood-fired oven, the scent of warm bread a delightful contrast to the other smells. These workshops weren't just places of production. They were often the craftsman's home as well, their family living in rooms behind or above the workspace. You get a sense of the interconnectedness of medieval life, where work and home were often intertwined. As you wander slightly beyond the immediate vicinity of the tavern, you might also glimpse the more official or religious buildings of the town, perhaps the parish church, its spire or tower visible above the lower buildings, its bells occasionally ringing out. Maybe a guild hall, where local craftsmen or merchants organize themselves. These buildings, often built of stone, stand out from the more humble dwellings and workshops, symbols of authority, faith, and community organization. The people you see outside the tavern are different, or perhaps just seen in a different light. They are going about their daily business, carrying water from a well, sweeping a doorway, tending to animals, working in their shops, walking with purpose from one place to another. They seem less focused on revelry and more on the practicalities of life. Children might be playing in the street, rolling hoops or chasing each other, oblivious to the dirt and dangers. Beggars might still be present, seeking alms from passers-by. It's a snapshot of medieval urban life, raw and unfiltered, happening all around you. You notice the lack of modern infrastructure. No paved roads, no sidewalks, no streetlights, beyond maybe a few torches or lanterns near important buildings, no public trash cans, hence the garbage strewn about, no visible signs of sanitation beyond rudimentary ditches. The boundary between human activity and the natural world, or at least the domesticated animal world, is much thinner here than in a modern town. Animals are everywhere: horses, donkeys, chickens, pigs, dogs, cats. They are part of the street scene, contributing to the sounds, smells, and general mess. It's a far cry from the neatly separated zones of a modern city. You could probably get a ticket for letting your pig wander down Main Street these days. Historians still argue whether medieval towns were generally well-ordered and functional, or if they were chaotic, unsanitary, and prone to disorder. While official regulations existed regarding markets, sanitation, and building, the reality on the ground likely varied greatly depending on the size and wealth of the town, the effectiveness of local authorities, and the challenges posed by dense populations and limited resources. You might see something truly unexpected. Here's a quirky tidbit: in some medieval towns, it wasn't uncommon to see domestic animals like pigs or chickens roaming freely in the streets, acting as informal garbage disposals by scavenging on refuse. So, that pig rooting around near the market stall isn't just lost. He might be performing a vital, if unglamorous, public service. Just try not to trip over him. Taking a moment outside the tavern provides perspective. The intense, enclosed world you just left is a hub, a vital social and economic node, but it exists within a larger, equally vibrant, if perhaps less frenetic, community. You see where the food for the tavern market comes from, where the tools used by travelers are made, where the rhythm of daily life continues regardless of the revelry and respite offered by the alehouse. The smells, sounds, and sights outside are different, a reminder that the medieval world was a complex tapestry of activities and environments. You've seen the haven, however rough, for travelers and locals, and now you're getting a glimpse of the wider world it serves. It makes you appreciate the tavern for what it is, a crucial point of connection and rest in a world where travel was hard and comforts were few. But it also reminds you that there's a whole medieval town out here, with its own life and rhythm, waiting to be explored, or perhaps, just waiting for you to get back on the road. Stepping outside the tavern, breathing the slightly less polluted air of the street, and seeing the wider medieval town around you, the market, the workshops, the homes, provides a valuable contrast to the intense, enclosed world you just left. It also inevitably brings your mind back to the journey that brought you here in the first place. Remember that long, weary trek? The days or weeks spent on the road, the aching muscles, the constant vigilance required? That journey wasn't just a physical act of moving from one place to another, it was an experience in itself, fraught with challenges and punctuated by sights that would be utterly alien to a modern traveler. Think back to the roads themselves. Forget smooth asphalt or even well-maintained gravel. Medieval roads were primarily ancient Roman routes, if you were lucky, or more often, just well-trodden paths that twisted and turned through the landscape, following the easiest terrain. They were uneven, prone to deep ruts carved by countless cartwheels, and often turned into impassable quagmires during wet weather. Traveling by foot meant constantly watching your step to avoid tripping or sinking ankle-deep in mud or something worse. Traveling by horse or cart was only marginally better, involving bone-jarring bumps and the constant risk of getting stuck. Bridges were often rickety wooden structures, if they existed at all, and crossing rivers without one could be dangerous, requiring fording or relying on unreliable ferrymen. The journey wasn't just about distance. It was about overcoming the terrain itself, a constant negotiation with the physical world. The pace of travel was dictated by foot or hoof. A person on foot might cover 15 to 20 miles a day, maybe a bit more if they were pushing hard. A horseman could go faster, perhaps 30 to 40 miles, but horses needed rest and feeding. Carts and wagons moved slowly, perhaps 10 to 15 miles a day. This meant that traveling any significant distance took a considerable amount of time. A journey of 100 miles could take a week or more, depending on the conditions and the mode of transport. Contrast that with zipping down a modern highway at 70 miles per hour. You could cover that distance in under 2 hours. Medieval travel required patience, endurance, and a willingness to accept that getting there would be a slow, arduous process. You couldn't just hop on a train or catch a flight. You had to put in the miles, one slow, difficult step or hoofbeat at a time. Your concept of distance and time was fundamentally different. Along the way, you encountered the landscape in a way modern travelers rarely do. You passed through dense forests, where shadows stretched long and the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. You crossed open fields, seeing the crops growing, or harvested, and the peasants working the land. You followed winding rivers and streams, the sound of flowing water a constant companion. You climbed hills and descended into valleys, the topography shaping your route and your effort. You saw the changing light of dawn and dusk paint the sky, and felt the bite of the wind or the warmth of the sun directly on your face, unfiltered by a car window. It was a much more intimate connection with the natural world, beautiful sometimes, but often harsh and unforgiving. And you had to be constantly aware of your surroundings, not just for the scenery, but for potential dangers. And dangers were very real. The roads between settlements were not patrolled or secured like modern highways. Bandits and outlaws were a genuine threat, lurking in forests or remote areas, preying on travelers, especially those who appeared to be carrying valuables. Traveling alone was particularly risky. Most people preferred to travel in groups or join up with other travelers for safety in numbers. You had to be armed or rely on the arms of your companions. Every shadow could hide a threat, every rustle in the bushes could be an ambush. Sleeping by the roadside, if you couldn't reach a settlement or a monastery offering hospitality, was a precarious undertaking, requiring posting watches and hoping for the best. It's enough to make you appreciate rest stops with well-lit parking lots, isn't it? Finding food and shelter along the way was also a challenge. Settlements were spaced further apart than modern towns and cities. You couldn't just pull into a gas station convenience store for a snack or find a motel every few miles. You had to plan your journey carefully, calculating how far you could travel each day and where you might find lodging. Monasteries often offered hospitality to travelers, especially pilgrims, but their resources were limited. Small villages might have a local alehouse that offered basic sustenance, but often little in the way of comfortable lodging. And then there were taverns like the one you just arrived at, strategically located along major routes, offering a vital lifeline to weary travelers. They weren't always pleasant, as you've learned, but they were a roof over your head, a warm hearth, and a chance to eat and drink something other than your dried rations. It's a mainstream historical fact that medieval travel was significantly more dangerous and difficult than modern travel due to poor road conditions, the threat of banditry, and the lack of widespread, reliable infrastructure for lodging and sustenance. The average person might travel very little in their lifetime, perhaps only to the nearest market town or a local pilgrimage site, simply because long-distance travel was so challenging and risky. Along the road, you would encounter other people, peasants working the fields, merchants traveling with goods, pilgrims on their way to a holy site, soldiers marching to or from campaigns, beggars seeking alms, and other travelers just like yourself, heading to their own destinations. You might exchange brief greetings, share news, or if you felt they were trustworthy, travel together for a while. Every encounter was a potential source of information, companionship, or danger. You learned to quickly assess people based on their appearance, demeanor, and company. It was a constant exercise in reading human nature in a world where trust was hard-earned and easily broken. You also saw the rhythm of rural life unfolding around you. The planting, tending, and harvesting of crops according to the seasons. the movement of livestock, the simple homes and lives of the people who lived outside the towns. It was a world deeply connected to the land and its cycles, a stark contrast to the slightly more concentrated, commerce-focused life of the town. You might see small chapels or wayside crosses, reminders of the importance of faith in people's lives and offering a moment for prayer or rest. You might pass by a local lord's manor house or castle, a symbol of authority and power in the region. Historians still argue whether the level of lawlessness on medieval roads was consistently high, or if it varied significantly depending on the region, the effectiveness of local authorities, and periods of political stability or unrest. Were encounters with bandits a daily fear for every traveler, or more of an occasional, localized risk? It's likely that while the potential was always there, the reality depended heavily on where and when you were traveling. The journey wasn't just about the physical challenges, it was also about the mental fortitude required. The loneliness of the road, especially if traveling alone. The uncertainty of what lay ahead. The constant need for vigilance. The discomfort of sleeping in the open or in rough shelters. The monotony of walking day after day. It required resilience and a strong sense of purpose to undertake a long journey in the medieval period. It wasn't a casual undertaking, it was a commitment. Here's a quirky tidbit. Travelers in the medieval period sometimes carried small personal charms or amulets for protection on the road, believing they could ward off dangers like bandits or accidents. These could be anything from religious tokens to dried herbs or animal parts, reflecting a blend of faith, superstition, and practical concern for safety in a world perceived to be full of unseen threats. Imagine strapping a rabbit's foot to your saddle for luck before setting off on a long trip. Whatever works, right? So, as you stand outside the tavern, looking back metaphorically at the path you've traveled, you understand the profound relief and gratitude you felt upon seeing that cluster of buildings, hearing the distant rumble of noise, and finally reaching this place. The tavern, for all its flaws and potential dangers, represented the end of that immediate struggle. It was warmth, shelter, food, drink, and the company of other human beings after the isolation and hardship of the road. It was a temporary sanctuary, a place to rest and recover before facing the next leg of your journey, whatever and wherever that might be. Your arrival here wasn't just reaching a destination, it was escaping the road, at least for a little while. You've seen the outside world, the town beyond the tavern walls, and been reminded of the journey that brought you here. Now, as the night deepens, or the day progresses, you have a choice. Do you step back into the familiar chaos of the tavern for another tankard, another story, another attempt at sleep? Or do you prepare to leave this place behind and face the road once more? The tavern offered respite, but the journey continues. You've experienced this slice of medieval life. It's time to consider the departure. You've navigated the smoky gloom, braved the olfactory assault, endured the cacophony, shared space with strangers, quenched your thirst with dubious ale, filled your belly with hearty pottage, witnessed, or perhaps participated in, the chaotic entertainment, survived the communal sleeping chamber, or the attempt at it, felt the prickle of potential danger, and stepped outside to glimpse the wider medieval world and reflect on the arduous journey that brought you to this temporary haven. The medieval tavern has offered you respite, sustenance, and a raw, unfiltered slice of life unlike anything you've ever experienced. But even the most necessary stops must eventually end. The road calls again, or perhaps your destination lies just beyond this town. Staying here indefinitely isn't an option. Life, and travel, must continue. You stand on the worn threshold, looking back inside for a moment. The firelight still flickers, casting dancing shadows. The noise still spills out, a muffled but persistent roar of voices, laughter, and music. The smells, though momentarily lessened by the fresher air outside, still cling to you, a physical reminder of where you've been. It's a world unto itself in there, a vibrant, messy, dangerous, and undeniably human space. You've been a part of it, an observer and a participant, absorbing its unique atmosphere. You think about the faces you saw in the firelight, the weary traveler, the boisterous merchant, the tense gambler, the stoic tavern keeper. Each one a story, a life lived out against the backdrop of this era. Turning away from the doorway, you face outwards again. The air is cooler now, perhaps even cold if it's night. The sounds of the town are different from the tavern's din, the smells less concentrated. The packed earth of the street stretches away, either towards the open road or further into the town. The prospect of leaving this place, for all its discomforts, feels a little daunting. It was, after all, a place of shelter. The road, as you know all too well, holds its own set of challenges and dangers that the tavern, despite its internal risks, at least offered a temporary shield against. You might settle your bill with the tavern keeper, a quick transaction involving a few more coins changing hands, maybe a nod or a grunt of acknowledgement. There's no lengthy checkout process, no survey asking about your stay. It's simply payment for services rendered: ale, food, a spot on a straw mattress, or the floor. They are already turning to the next patron, their attention shifting instantly. You are just one more face passing through their doors, another traveler on a long line of travelers who have sought refuge here over the decades, even centuries. As you step fully out onto the street, the light changes again. If it's morning, the sun is rising, casting long, pale shadows and promising a new day of travel. If it's night, the darkness feels deeper than it did inside, broken only by distant torches or moonlight. The cold seeps into your bones, a stark contrast to the stuffy warmth of the tavern. You pull your cloak tighter around you. The sounds of the street, though less overwhelming than the tavern's roar, feel sharper, clearer now: the distant bark of a dog, the creak of a wagon, the chime of a far-off bell. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with air that, while not clean by modern standards, feels wonderfully free of dense smoke and stale ale. You still smell like the tavern, though. You probably will for days. It's like a medieval version of forgetting your phone charger. You leave the place, but it leaves its mark on you. Your modern self might crave a shower, maybe even a full decontamination suite, but your medieval self just accepts the lingering scent as part of the travel experience. Reflecting on your time inside, you consider the different aspects you experienced. The initial sensory overload, that overwhelming plunge into darkness, smell, and noise. The faces of the people, a microcosm of medieval society, gathered together for a shared purpose. The tavern keeper, the weary linchpin holding it all together. The ale, that cloudy, earthy essential drink. The food, simple but filling. The entertainment, from raucous gambling to off-key singing. And the sleep, or lack thereof, in the crowded, uncomfortable communal chamber. You survived the potential dangers, both seen and unseen. You didn't get into a fight, you didn't get robbed, you hope, and you didn't succumb to dysentery yet. Small victories in the medieval world. It's a mainstream historical fact that despite their often rowdy reputation, medieval taverns played a crucial role in facilitating travel and commerce by providing essential services like lodging, food, drink, and information exchange along major routes. They were more than just drinking establishments. They were vital nodes in the transportation and communication networks of the time. You appreciate this now, understanding the necessity of such a place, even if it wasn't the most comfortable or hygienic. You might look back at the tavern one last time. It seems less imposing now, just a building among others, its unique energy contained within its walls, spilling out only as sound and smell. It served its purpose. It offered you a brief pause, a chance to rest and refuel before continuing your journey. It showed you a side of medieval life that is often overlooked in tales of castles and kings, the gritty, everyday reality of ordinary people, gathering together, seeking warmth, company, and a bit of oblivion from the hardships of their world. You think about the stories you overheard, the snippets of news and gossip that circulated freely within those walls. It was a living newspaper, a medieval internet cafe, albeit one that required shouting your posts and hoping someone was sober enough to read them. Historians still argue about the extent to which medieval taverns were reliable sources of information, or if the news disseminated within them was often distorted by rumor, exaggeration, and drunken misinterpretation. Were you getting accurate reports from distant lands, or just the medieval equivalent of clickbait and conspiracy theories? Probably a healthy mix of both. As you prepare to set off, you adjust your pack, feel the familiar weight of your belongings, and perhaps check that your purse is still securely hidden. The prospect of the road ahead, with its unpredictable terrain and potential dangers, feels real again. But you are rested, you are fed, you are hydrated with ale, but still, you are ready to face it. The tavern has done its job. You might recall a quirky tidbit you learned or observed while inside. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval travelers would carry their own small, collapsible drinking cups, perhaps made of leather or metal, to avoid sharing tankards in taverns and potentially reduce the risk of illness. A wise precaution, though maybe not always practical if you needed to drink the sheer volume of ale required daily. Imagine trying to keep track of your tiny foldable cup in that chaos. You'd probably lose it within minutes, or someone would accidentally sit on it. The first few steps away from the tavern feel different. You are no longer just arriving, you are departing. You are leaving behind the concentrated energy of that single building and rejoining the broader flow of medieval life. The sounds of the tavern fade behind you, becoming just another part of the background noise of the town. The smells begin to disperse, replaced by the scents of the street, the shops, the stables. The visual chaos of the crowded interior is replaced by the more ordered, or perhaps just differently chaotic, arrangement of buildings and streets. You have experienced the medieval tavern, not just as a historical concept, but as a lived, sensory reality. It was loud, it was smelly, it was uncomfortable, it was potentially dangerous, but it was also warm, vital, and full of life. It was a necessary stop, a place of transition between the rigors of the road and the demands of your destination. You carry the memory of it with you, the taste of the ale, the feel of the straw, the sound of the laughter and shouting, the smell of the smoke. It is etched into your senses. As you walk away, the tavern shrinks behind you, becoming just another building on the street. Its light and noise diminish. The experience is over, but the journey continues. You step forward back into the medieval world, ready for whatever comes next, carrying the knowledge and the sensory imprint of your visit to the medieval tavern. It was a night, or day, you won't soon forget, a vivid reminder of the realities of life and travel in a distant past. Now, as the demands of the journey reassert themselves, and the world outside the tavern walls beckons, it's time to let the sounds and smells of this place fade, and allow your mind to drift towards rest. The sounds of the medieval world begin to soften now, the clamor of the tavern, the rumble of carts, the distant bells. They all start to recede into the background, becoming gentler, less insistent. The air around you feels quieter, calmer, as the vibrant energy of the day and the tavern's night begins to settle. You can feel the weight of your journey, the miles you've traveled, the experiences you've had, starting to press down on you, a gentle reminder that it's time for your own rest. The flickering firelight, the rough textures, the potent smells, they soften in your memory now, becoming less sharp, more like echoes. You are safe now, here, in your own time, letting the echoes of the past drift away. The medieval tavern, with all its chaos and character, is a memory, a story that you've held in your mind for a while. It's time to close the door on that world for tonight. Feel your body relax, letting go of any tension from the long journey, the crowded room, the hard bed. The sounds fade into a soft hum, the smells dissipate into clean air, the flickering lights dim and disappear. You are here, now, comfortable and safe. The journey is over for tonight. Just breathe softly, letting the quiet settle around you. Let the sounds of the past fade away completely, leaving only the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. You are drifting now, peaceful and still. Sleep is coming,